Welcome back to the Valiant Few Podcast. I'm your host, Raptor, along with Crossfire and Slapshot. We will be talking about the First Amendment. Go!
So I think it's important to first preface anything that when we talk about amendments with an actual reading from the Constitution itself, like word for word about what the First Amendment is. So that way there's no bias to it, and that gets us like a strong foundation for that. So according to the Legal Information Institute from the Cornell Law School, the First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So that's kind of a mouthful there.
One of the big things that I know we were talking about prior to starting this was how whenever we pulled this up and we saw the first word in this says Congress. And one of our biggest things that we, I guess, have issues with is the fact that large social media platforms are actively censoring people's speech, if they disagree with them or not. And we have serious issue with this because, in my opinion, the ramifications of allowing a large company to actively suppress people that they disagree with, I believe, falls under a First Amendment issue. Obviously not Congress is making this, but I think that there definitely should be some kind of regulation on large companies.
More specifically, large companies that operate on a public platform. Because you have large companies that have 30, 40,000 plus people that do not operate on a public platform specifically with information distributing. So when you go through and alter the speech on, name whatever platform you want, you can think of a couple. When you go through and alter people's speech and their opinions, you alter the flow of information, and deliberately doing that is definitely not healthy for not just people, but education in general.
And free people that respect each other's opinions regardless of if they disagree or agree with them. I may disagree with your opinion on a certain subject, but I still believe that we should have some sense of understanding of where we came from and understand the good and the bad and where we are today.
Because disagreeing can get a lot done. That's how a lot of things are built. You disagree on something, you sit there and talk it out, see everybody else's opinions and their viewpoints, and maybe you see something that you never thought to look at just because it's a total different viewpoint. And it becomes dangerous when you not only shut that out, but other people rely on single point sources to get their information, get their news from, and that completely shuts them out from one side of the story entirely.
And one thing that's really important, I think, to mention was that our founding fathers built this country based on the ideology of being able to do as you pleased and live the life you want to live by coming to this new world, this new land back in that day. And whereas in the First Amendment from the Legal Information Institute, no law respecting an establishment of religion. So religion being an example for this, like, people want to be able to express their own beliefs, and based on what you guys are talking about, it's people need to be able to express their own beliefs, and that's what creates individualism and giving everybody a sense of their own self. We can't all be the same, like you guys are talking about. It's
especially with the size of the United States.
Right, of course.
And another good point too to add is and it just occurred to me when you said that, it's a lot of the stuff you have to take into consideration the time frame that this was written. So back when the First Amendment was written, of course there was no social media. Back then you would ride by horse or have a courier service to get your information across to somebody, or it will be published, in a local journal or a newspaper, or take your choice on what was available at the time. there's no idea that there's going to be this massive, huge, multi-billion person, planetary communication set up.
Where you can talk to your buddy across the planet instantly without any of the message getting mixed up or anything like that. Like before, one of the things that I think is, I think the founding fathers had a vast knowledge and had very great foresight, and in the way that they wrote the Constitution. One thing that I don't think they might have been able to maybe see is just how connected we are today.
Yeah, I definitely don't think so.
Because Crossfire said with the courier service, and it wasn't until very recently, like this century or last, that we even were able to talk to people expediently on just like from Britain to here.
The tail end of the 19th century when telegraph and electricity started to come in, because anything before that was putting your mail. So if it was using like the New York to Great Britain example, the only way to get a message across there was to literally put your mail on a ship and have it take a month to get across. So once they start introducing the telegraph, that becomes a lot more instant. So like you said, there's only the last 120 years that stuff really has started to become connected. I don't think anybody could have seen that.
And I think one point to make going forward is with the point of these amendments were written, yes, back in the day, but we're kind of uncovering them to go over the fact they are, yes, old, but still very, very relevant in today's life. Maybe not in some instances like our forefathers probably thought they were back in the day. They could never have seen them being applied today, such as these multi-million-dollar social media companies, billion,
trillions, yeah.
But like the First Amendment is still very, very relevant to everyday life. So I'd like to turn it over to Raptor to touch a little bit more on some of his experience exercising his First Amendment rights. Raptor?
I was recently zucked off of Facebook due to I had created a group that was obviously satire, and honestly no one even posted it. It was made as a joke. A few jokes were put into it, and then I actually, at one point, especially because our current political climate, I was looking through Facebook, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this, but I get angry reading some of the comments and just seeing people, and what they say is like completely the opposite of what is actually happening, what should be happening. And I just got mad, and I was like, alright, this is actually messing with my mental health, so I'm just going to delete Facebook. And so I was off it for a while, and then for whatever reason I re-downloaded it and checked it out, and I went to log in, and I was cut out.
Well, we had our group that we were looking at. We had our group, and then that was going to lead into what I was going to say, where we had just put together what was quite literally a neighborhood watch group, where we explicitly told all of our members and whatnot that there's nothing, there's no militia related stuff, nothing like that. It was purely just a group to keep an eye on our neighborhood, especially we had multiple riot situations and whatnot that we were concerned about, and we were just a bunch of concerned citizens trying to protect ourselves. And next thing you know, we get flagged and get all the admins related to that page had all their accounts shut down, and it's like we literally didn't do anything.
Yeah, and there were explicit groups, or explicitly said in the group, it was like we denounce white supremacy, we denounce racists, we don't want, that is not the point of that is not the point of what the founders intended for us to do. And a lot of people will disagree with that, in the sense that they like to throw out the 3/5 compromise. But what people don't actually realize is that was put in there to prevent the South from continuing slavery.
I solely believe that it's just it's completely unfair to us because we did create this group to provide more of a sense of security for our community because we come from a rather, I don't want to say small suburb, but
Relatively rural.
Rural is the word I'd use.
Whereas the people definitely outnumber law enforcement. So when it comes to things such as wild as a riot or an unlawful protest, the police might not be readily available. SWAT team more so might not be as readily available to defend the town from some unknown force, whether it be an unlawful
assembly.
Yeah.
Well, see, it's even simpler than that though, because it wasn't even specifically targeted towards like if there's no police showed up or the people that show up. It wasn't like I said. That to me falls underneath like vigilantism and stuff. Which
right. We're not trying to be police officers.
No, that wasn't the idea. It's like if there's anything weird happening around. And again, this was all during the
context. Yeah.
The height of all of the riots when. There were
magical brick trucks.
Magical brick pallets showing up, and trucks full of shields and stuff magically showing up. And when we're close, within, I'd say within 50 miles of a major city, and that city starts being burnt down, that really puts us on edge. And it's just we more so made the group to share information around. That way, people would be. That they wouldn't be caught off guard.
And we even had protesters that would talk to us and tell us hey, we don't want these violent people here, and there were violent people.
Yeah, we specifically.
And they told us hey, these people are violent. These people are violent. Keep an eye on them, or whatever. And like we said, we weren't trying to be vigilantes. We were literally just standing by.
Yeah, and we were specifically going out of our way to express that we supported their right to peacefully protest. If they want to we supported both sides of it because each side has their, I don't know, you call them grievances. I just to simplify it, and we support their right to do that. I mean, it's written right in the First Amendment that it's like that there is no law that will restrict the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Which we agree with, but when that situation starts to turn hairy and people start to become less than peaceful, then we just wanted to make sure everybody had awareness of this because people are getting killed over this, and we would hate to see something like it happen in a lot of different places, and people are a lot of it's just the poor people were not prepared, and that's all it was, and not even prepared as call to arms, do this. It's prepared as in a sense of, hey, this is going on, just keep an eye out over this, or, whatever the particular situation is. You can think of 1,000 scenarios to go there. And, and we're punished as a result for it. Some of us had, international friends that we went to college with that are gone now. We had, multiple business accounts and whatnot that were all related to, different PR things and whatnot. And just because we were trying to protect the welfare of others, we have our speech ripped from us because the platform deemed us apparently that something was wrong with it. We were never even given a reason why we were shut down, and now we're 2-3 months later, and there's still no word. I've sent multiple emails to them. You can't call anybody.
Yeah, my account still says reviewing if I log into it, or we will review it, but due to COVID-19. We haven't got to it yet, basically.
What really triggers me, just irks me, is that these Facebook groups and Twitter pages for protesting, and I'll put air quotes around protesting because sometimes they aren't even protests. They are or what turn into these riots. These pages for assembling those are still up and active. Very active and living well, whereas there's a lot of
just regular people that created groups after a significant event in their town where they felt the need to like be able to get information out to a lot of people very quickly, and we were even surprised by whenever we created the group, because it was just a few people, and then maybe over a week that it was like the whole town was in the group.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Like before everything shut down, what we had, I think nearly 1,000 members in it, and we had like several hundred new invites a day.
Yeah, and we had
everything restricted because it literally wasn't even an open group. Like you could, and like that's where people might argue. It's like, oh yeah, well if you have an open group, that's like you know, like that kind of fits in that narrative. It might be a problem, but the group itself wasn't even open. Like I don't even think you could find it if you searched for it because it was closed. You had to be invited only to the group.
It was a private group, and once we realized that there may be a whole lot of people in there, and some of those people may not have been good, we didn't want them a part of the group.
Yes, it was actively patrolled. Like, if anybody was doing anything that literally was like militia related, definitely illegal. That was okay. So that's the first part. Yeah, but like even simple things like there was I can think of one instance. There was a person that put a picture of their gun in the chat. I immediately was like, hey, this needs to take it down. I shut the post down and everything like that, because it's not the idea. It's not a show your guns. It's not a, again, expressing explicitly, it's not a militia. It's literally like, if you see anything that's strange going on that you think can help possibly save somebody's life, this is what it is. And we were shut down over it. And not just the page, our entire, like every one of the admin's accounts are permanently gone as far as we can tell. Like that's some serious major suppression, and that's just our example. I mean, there are, you know, hundreds, there's thousands of examples of people doing this. Like, even more recently, it's like, you know, you have posts that are from official sources, and because they don't fit this narrative, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to just call it a narrative, but it's straight up a narrative.
It's a narrative.
It's a narrative. That like these official pages are shut down,
or silenced, or banned, or just not allowed to comment on it. And they even police DMs too. Like, you can't post links to stuff. And I kind of want to hop back onto the group and moderation. We were self moderating it, meaning us as the people that ran it were moderating it so that it was deemed a safe environment, or one that was not malicious. We had no malicious intent. We didn't want anyone with malicious intent in our group, because that would,
one rotten egg makes it, or one,
and that happens a lot. But I want to make sure that we clarify that is very different from what these large social media platforms are doing, which is they're not moderating speech. They're simply silencing ideas that they disagree with, or news that is from reliable sources that they disagree with, or they don't want posted because the election is coming up. And this is pertinent information to the election. And I don't know how many people are on the fence at this point on who they are voting for, but
it's still just a premise.
It's still important information, and it could sway some voters.
I think to transition into the next point of, you had lightly talked about it with how social media is kind of suppressing people. I wanted to bring up a recent article that the New York Post had released that I know both of you are aware of, that Facebook and Twitter aren't too keen of people posting the link on it.
Yeah,
about Joe Biden.
Oh yeah.
How funny is that?
Yeah. Well, of course, like I said, it fits a narrative, and it's not so much that. And to clarify, it's not, you know, that it's like, no, I want this guy to win, I want this guy to win. It's not to do with that. It has to do with making it a fair playing field for everybody. If you literally cannot share a link because it gets flagged because the algorithm shuts it down.
Because they don't like it.
Because it
doesn't follow their
beliefs. Yeah. Then how could you possibly call that like freedom of speech, freedom of information?
And the free market, this is a good thing to point on. The free market of ideas.
Yeah, that's extremely important.
And that's where I think a lot of this comes from. Is in the United States, the founders wanted a free market of ideas. Saying racist things is not illegal. Saying anything off the wall or crazy or whatever, it's not illegal. And quite honestly, it shouldn't be, because we should be able to look at those people and be like, yep, that is not what we want to be. We don't like that. We don't want that in power. We don't want those kinds of people deciding how we live our lives.
The freedom to disagree with them,
Yeah.
and to openly. I mean, yeah, again, because you can openly like shut somebody down if they're like, would use racism. If they're being racist, of course that's a terrible thing.
Yeah, we don't.
You sit there and call them out, but like you said, if it becomes dangerous if you start to regulate speech. So like say you start regulating racism, not only is that dangerous because that opens up an entire opens up the Pandora's box of regulating everything.
Yeah, censorship.
Straight up open door to censorship. It literally goes against the First Amendment. Just fundamentally, because it says that, Congress, and no matter which body that an idea came up with this, if it was done on the other, if it was done through like the executive branch, it'd have to come back through Congress anyway to be a law, that a law can't be established to shut down free speech, regardless of how much people disagree with it. You have to have that ability to disagree with people.
And cancel culture is kind of circumventing the law. They're not they legally, according to the First Amendment, they can't pass something that says, hey, you have an idea that I don't like, so stop talking. But what they can do is, because of these social media platforms are all connecting and have a lot, the base is massive, potentially the whole world. You can be like, hey, X person said something awful. Let's get them fired from their job and destroy their entire life in this as easy as 2 clicks, or saying a few words, or just bombarding them. Now that person who maybe whatever they said was taken out of context, maybe it was taken something they said 20 years ago that doesn't go with how they feel today, because crazy thought, people change. One person maybe today they don't like apples, and tomorrow they try an apple and they love it.
Yeah, well, it's all experience based, and like you said, where you take one thing out of context, like literally taking a video and snipping it, and like in framing it differently, or again taking something from 20 years ago, is most of the time when they take people down. It's like, oh, you said this in 1979. It's like, dude, that was like 40 years ago. You don't think that my opinion could have changed in 40 years?
Learned anything?
Yeah.
Like, I am stagnant in my learning. Once
For
I hit
40
20,
years.
Once I hit 20, I just stopped learning. Everything that happens after this, none of it matters.
My brain ran out of storage space. I'm gonna have to buy an external hard drive for it.
I just won't ever read anything again. I'll just know this forever, and that's it.
I was browsing the interweb briefly, trying to get some more information on some points to mention. And from Middle Tennessee State University, they kind of broke down the First Amendment a little bit. And one of the points on their site is the First Amendment is neither left-wing or right-wing. It can be used to push for social and political change or to oppose change. The First Amendment is for everyone.
Which I agree with.
Yeah, I agree.
I would imagine.
I want to
both
have,
agree.
and I love having real debates with people that have information that I might not have, or they got their information from somewhere, I got my information from somewhere. We go back and forth, we talk about our ideas, and I've had plenty of those conversations, and I love those conversations because a lot of time we find that we actually agree on a lot of stuff, and maybe we just disagree on how to get to the point that we both want to get to.
And you learn something a lot of the times out of them.
Yeah, and you see that person as a person, which is another thing that I think social media kind of destroys.
Just the whole entire concept of cancel culture as it is, too, on top of that.
It's like road rage. Like, because you can sit in your car and you see some guy that cuts you off, and you can just sit there and flip him off and beat on your steering wheel, and I just like, ugh, angry. But like, that person can't hear you. But on social media, you can sit there and bang on your space bar and type your mean comments to whoever you want on the planet. I can sit here right now and tell Donald Trump, hey, you're orange. And then
it's
like,
out there.
It's out there. Like, I can just sit there and send him DMs all day, every day, and just tell him how my day is going and all of that. But that's not how real life works. I can't just talk to Donald Trump, or if someone cuts me off, I usually take the high road. I'm like, all right, I guess that's all right. Yeah. Or just like I don't let these little things get on my mind.
There's quite a lot more to really get worked up about. I completely agree with that, because like there's a point. It's just like what good is me getting mad gonna do about this? Going back to the road rage example, it's like if I get pissed off about this, what's it gonna do? I mean, if I'm this way, if I'm glad about it, if I'm mad about it, or if I'm just in the middle, it's gonna have the same exact result, unless you smash your car into somebody or something. Then it's a totally different result. But for the most part, it's not gonna change anything. So why get worked up about it? But back to what you were saying, it's like what you were saying about like that it's not left wing or right wing. Not only do I support the people that have different viewpoints than I, their right to do that, I would fight for their right to do that.
Absolutely.
And my point of bringing this up originally was it's just Facebook and Twitter primarily are the most prevalent examples that it's become completely left wing almost.
It's become an echo chamber, and all the people that are banned or forced to leave go to like social media platforms like Parler, and Parler, if I did a little bit of research on them, they never intended Parler to be like a right-wing echo chamber, and the founders of Parler are left-leaning.
What is Parler?
Parler is basically at the moment it's right-wing Twitter.
Yeah, it's like even set up has the same type of like handle system and whatnot.
Okay.
But even then, that's bad too, to have just a purely one ideology in one place, because like just how Twitter is an echo chamber for the left, Parler becomes an echo chamber for the right. That's not good to have.
Absolutely not.
And then we don't talk, like there's no discourse at all. There's no basically everyone gets in the mindset of we don't need to work together with them. We can just do it without them. And then that is a slippery slope that leads to
boom, civil war.
No, it's not quite.
You skipped a couple steps, but
people
divide. Yeah.
People we create the divide that we have today, and then we have people that they don't want to work. They don't even want to listen to an opposite side. For instance, since I served in the Army, and any time that I've had conversations, I didn't necessarily make it private that I served in the Army, and maybe I would use some of that as examples of whenever I brought up points. So, like, I would be in a conversation, I would use an example that I got from the Army, an experience that I had, and instead of, like, coming at my experience and my opinion with another experience and another opinion, or an article, or some kind of like evidence that maybe backs what they're saying, they just say you're a bootlegger, you're racist, you're misogynist, you're like all of that stuff, and that doesn't help anyone. That makes them feel good right now, I guess, but nothing was accomplished. There was no solution to be had or discussed. It was just like, hey, you don't matter because you did a thing. And it comes down to the point where it's just like, so we're having a conversation, I say something, and then you just call me a racist, and you have no idea who I am. We're talking on maybe a mutual person's post that they made, and where I may be having a discussion with that person, and then you hop in, and then you're just like white knight to the rescue saying you're a racist. You don't know me. You have no idea. And that again goes back to the car thing. It's just like, you don't know what that guy's going through during the day. Like maybe he wasn't paying attention, maybe he's tired because he just got done working a 16-hour shift. Like there's no like giving people breaks anymore. It's like everything that you say is doctrine to who you are as a person at all times.
Yeah, it's like everybody's supposed to be 100% infallible all the time. You're automatically supposed to say everything perfectly. It's like in that type of culture there is really super bad, because it breeds this I'll use just default to the word discourse, but there's this bitter feelings towards other people. It's like, people aren't naturally evil, or they're not always out to hurt your feelings and stuff like that. Like you said, just sometimes people need to give others a bit of a break sometime, and that's lost. That's totally lost with us, with like not just our generation, but the generation preceding us, and starting to see it in the generation that's succeeding us.
Every time I go to work, I've been recently on the night shift, and I maybe pass a total of 10 cars on my half-hour drive. And I always think, it's like, wow, what is this guy doing at like 2:30 in the morning on a weekday driving? Like, where is he going?
Probably the same thing as you.
I think
something similar, maybe coming home from a shift.
Right, and it's like everyone is living their own life, doing their own thing, and everyone should be allowed to live their own life and do their own thing. Why do we need to be silenced or be told what to do by?
What do you have to fear saying your own opinion?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're making this podcast, is because we want a place that we can talk about our opinions and have discussion with people. We are just regular people, and discussion with people that may be way more educated than us, maybe less educated than us, and want to bring up points that they feel are important. And like the conversation is important, because you find that, at least most of the time, with people that I've had conversations with, you find that you have a lot of stuff in common with people that you may on paper disagree with on every aspect.
But like you said, and I can relate to this with one of my business partners, and we always, I'd say 99% of the time, that we agree on the end goal, like what's good here, what's good there, etc. We agree on that. So it's like some stuff is just straight obvious. It's like, well, of course, why would it be any other way? But you disagree on the process on how to get there, and that's fine, because I might think, oh, well, doing this X, Y, and Z is perfect, and then I go, well, what about if you did this A, B, C? And it's like, oh, wow, that's way easier. Or maybe you can enlighten them with the way you think, and they're like, oh, wow, your way is easier. Or most of the time, you pull elements from each of them. That's why disagreeing is so important, because I've noticed a lot of efficiency that comes out of it if it's done right.
And nobody has all the answers.
Of course not.
Of course not, right. And also, I think it's important to mention that whenever it comes to completing a project, maybe doing something against what you think is a better idea, and going along with it is good for you, because it opens your eyes to everyone else's opinions, and there's more than one way to do things.
Exactly.
And even if you fail, that teaches your peer a lesson, and they learn something valuable from it. I think people learn more from failure more so than successes.
And especially if we're talking about a business thing, two people come up with ideas, and one person's idea is X and one person's idea is Y, and X is the best idea and the other person says Y is the best idea, and nobody in that whole area is willing to subordinate themselves to the other. And that goes into a leadership talk, but people are so high strung in their own opinions and aren't willing to, they don't want to have discourse. And I want to have discourse. I want people to disagree with me, but if they disagree with me, I want them to bring to the table the same amount of work that I put into in developing my own opinions. I don't just sit there and watch the news. I don't just sit there and watch like all the mainstream media, CNN, Fox, any of them. I may get a story from them. Okay, so they say something, and then I go on the internet and I read some articles and I listen to other people talking about these stories, because we can all say that there is an inherent bias in the media, regardless of if it's left-wing or right-wing. There are left-wing news media outlets and there are right-wing news media outlets. Absolutely. And it takes a lot of people will just sit there and just suck in whatever news media outlet that they want. They sit there and veg out and they're just like, yes, CNN tells me that potatoes are bad and are racist and I can't eat them. So that is what I will do.
Well, see, a lot of thing with that is it boils down to what you have access to. A lot of people, or not even what you just explicitly have access to, what you have the easiest access to, because a lot of people don't like to go through the extra effort to verify a story. When, like, you know, I've personally went on, you know, one site and it says this thing clear and cut, and you go on another site and it says it could not be any different. It's like almost the exact opposite wording, and that falls down to the political bias between the two. And that's why I always like to check, you know, like if it's a major story, I like to check, you know, 3-4 different places if I possibly can to try to avoid that, because everything has inherent bias. I mean, I can only think of a couple places off the top of my head that are pretty much in the middle.
Or the sources try to be as objective as possible, and that's usually where I sit there and I'll actually like listen to what they have to say, and then if there's something that they say that I disagree with, or something that I hadn't heard before and I want to look into it, then I'll go and do my own research. But I think that's something kind of lost in today's America, because people don't want to hear politics, and for good reason, because politics can be a little not fun a lot of the time, because people have strong opinions and that, but it's important, and it could be fun if people actually just did a little bit of research on their own and came up with a legitimate opinion on whatever's going on, rather than just like disagreeing for the sense of disagreement, or just not. They know that whatever news media they hear says that it's bad, so I'm just going to say it's bad without any other context.
Even simpler than that, actually, I just thought about it. It's like what boils down to it, why I think people are afraid to, you know, to get into conversations, or they're afraid to do this X, Y, and Z, is I think it boils down to they're like afraid to be wrong. A lot of people, like, they're afraid to be told that they're wrong or proven that they're wrong, because their opinion is steadfast. And it's like, if you sit there and you're what you're thinking, it's like, oh, you know, I've spent the last 6 years thinking X is true, and then someone comes up with you this, you know, this concise evidence that's completely false. It's kind of destroying and defeating in a way. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that type of, I don't want to just say rejection, but you know, there's that being wrong. I think it just boils down to that, like, you know, a lot of things now, children, you know, aren't being told that they're wrong by their parents and stuff, and I think it just stems from that, for lack of better words.
Yeah,
but generations out of generations of that stacking up.
I think that could be
one
cause of it. That could definitely be, people not wanting to be wrong is something that is definitely an issue, because whenever it comes down to being wrong, people are, like I said before, unwilling to subordinate themselves. They're not willing to sit there and be like, oh, maybe the one thing that I was talking about was completely wrong, and the source that I got was incorrect. Or they're just, and instead of doing that, they dig in further. They're like, I'm right, and there's nothing you can say that's going to change my mind, and you're a racist, and they start attacking people personally rather than having conversations.
Yeah, well, see, I think it boils down to again, they're afraid of the confrontation, so they just do whatever they can to attack the person, because they can't sit there and understand that their idea is compromised. Like, if I sit there and someone's like, well, you know, your idea is fundamentally flawed because X, Y, and Z, and I mean, if, you know, as long as there's some actual true basis to it, I'd be like, oh, well, you know, maybe that's something I need to look into, or whatnot. I don't sit there and just get, for lack of better words, scared out of my mind because I'm afraid for someone to tell me that I'm wrong. I mean, like you said earlier, it's like, you know, sometimes being wrong is the most valuable way to learn something.
Every time you're wrong, you learn something.
Right. Especially when it comes to a business standpoint. I can give a few examples from work where a manager and I will be conversing on the best way to go about getting packages to certain routes in the most efficient manner when we're dealing with 55,000+ packages in the building just for the day. And it's like, we have the sorter set a certain way, and it's like, no, I think that these packages go to this belt or this belt. Well, what if the volume's higher on this belt? So we're just trying to we converse and argue maybe a little bit on the best way to evenly distribute the workload based upon the amount of workers on each belt, because every belt's totally different. And one day I remember giving him advice on, you know, the workers on the 300 belt aren't exactly up to par with the workers on the 6. And, you know, I'll tell him, I think you need to get more packages over to the 600 belt solely because they have more people there. And he's like, no, I don't think so. It needs to be evenly distributed. And, you know, we split it up evenly. I'm just like, all right, yeah, let's do it that way for the day. And turns out the 300 belt ended up getting crushed. We got destroyed with a little bit more packages on that belt than the 6 did. So, point being said, by the end of the day, he's like, you know, you were right. We should have split this up a little bit or a little bit differently. We should have given the 6 a little bit more. And I think a lot of people are afraid to admit when they're wrong because it exposes them.
It's vulnerable.
Right.
It's a very vulnerable position, but I also think that people respect that a ton more than like just a straight up attack. Like you're not some kind of warrior calling me a racist.
But just listening to you saying that, like, he came up to you and is like, yeah, hey, we should have done it this way. I never even met the guy, and I already have a lot of respect for him because it takes a lot to really sit there and admit, well, hey, wow, you even said to do this, and I disagree with you because I was steadfast in my beliefs, and turns out you're right. It takes a lot to do that, you know?
That happened a lot in the Army. People would... Because in the Army there's a rank structure, and certain ranks have to listen to the higher ranks, and like we would be doing something and I would come up with an idea and say, hey, we should throw up this antenna this way, and or more specifically, we were building a Humvee so then it could do a certain task, and my leader was like, no, you can't do it that way. It'll never work that way. And I knew it would work because I also had a little bit of previous knowledge on how the Humvee works. I have a little bit of I'm kind of a jack of all trades in the sense that I put a lot of time researching a lot of things, whether that be like car mechanics, politics, IT, guns, etc. I knew a bit about cars, and I knew a bit about powering cars, and that was our issue. And I did a few things here and there, connected things a different way than what he wanted, and it eventually worked. But this leader in particular never admitted it or anything, and I actually ended up taking a deployment to get out of that area because it was toxic. I was not having a good time learning that or being around that kind of leader.
And some people just do not have humility. I mean, that's become evidently clear nowadays, you know, that like some people just
Completely lack any ability to say that they're wrong about stuff. And that's just a shame, you know?
I think it's worth mentioning that being humble will get you a lot farther than being in it for your own good.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so this you know, was a tangent, but this all is the foundation of why we're having so many problems with, you know, what we feel is the First Amendment. You know, that's because to bring it back to where everything was at.
Right.
If people disagree, they immediately go towards, you know, canceling one another. Although it's very inherently obvious which side has the majority control over who's being canceled, for lack of better words. And, you know, everything we set up to this point really sets the stage for that, where people now just since they can't agree on stuff, and they can't say that they disagree, so they just go about shutting everything down just because they can't accept that it's different.
People are scared out of their opinions, and if you're sitting there thinking, wow, I'm so happy that these people have stopped talking, like, that's kind of messed up.
That's pretty depraved, you know?
Like, what makes you so much better just because you think you have some kind of moral high ground because you think a certain way and they think a different way? No. You may live on the other side of the planet and have a completely different experience, whereas this person lives in this area, or to be more specific, a person in the city has no idea what it's like to live in Aurora area, and I've experienced that firsthand with a lot of the Army is a big melting pot, and I met people who lived in LA, and I come from a rural thing in the middle of nowhere. And I would talk about one thing, and then he'd be like, that's absolutely insane. Like, we could never do something like that. Like, even as simple as having a fire in my backyard.
Now, Raptor, let me ask you this. If, given everything going on with today's obviously debacle and the First Amendment and being able to express it, how do you think, obviously there's a problem right now. We can all see that there's a given problem.
I think pretty much anybody can see, regardless of your political affiliations, and as long as you have sense some ability to reason, you can see there's an issue. Yeah.
Right. So, Raptor, what do you think would be the first way to turn this around to get it back to what the First Amendment actually means?
I think big these large social media companies need some sort of regulation that says you can't just ban people because you disagree with them, or you can't take information away just because it damages maybe the political party that organization donates to.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't keep up with mainstream news sources as much as I probably could, or maybe even should. But is it someone in the Democratic Party or someone, one of the Facebook or Twitter has a huge input with the political Democratic standpoint?
Well, one of Facebook's higher ups is Biden's, I think, media person. I'm not entirely sure.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I've recently heard that on the news, and that
that
kind of struck me funny. I was like, wow, like this might explain a lot.
Well, that's not biased at all.
So they basically have a line straight back to Facebook. You're like, hey, stop talking about that. It hurts. And then they can, then that's, it happens exactly of what we have. We have basically Orwellian censorship.
And I'm sorry I don't have enough. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have like enough knowledge on that specifically, but I did know that there was a higher up that did have a specific influence on that, and that's why I wanted to mention that. It's like, I think if there's going to be any kind of turning point, they obviously there's some conflict of interest there, so they need to, that higher up needs to be removed, and they need to have a very neutral, moderate person in place.
Not necessarily. Well, so it's a party, or not party, but it's Biden's campaign team.
Right.
So obviously he can pick whoever he wants, but there also has to be, like, that's an obvious conflict of interest in the sense that that person can now, so bad press comes out on Biden, and then they're literally just a phone call away, because how many jobs have you been to that you just completely stopped talking to everybody at your job? And they were a higher up, so they have the especially with higher up positions, you have a bit of a connection and network with a lot of people.
You absolutely do, especially like my background. Like, there's jobs that that I haven't worked at for 3 years, and the people that are the managers there will call me, like even like, just for real honest things, like they'll call me like, hey man, it's like I was working on this, couldn't figure it out. Like, people that were my successors, and like I couldn't figure this out, but this is something you've ran through before, can you help me with this? It's just the way that the world works. So you don't absolutely cut ties to it, and unless you have some formal contractual thing. There's a couple things that have
conflict
stuff
of interest.
Usually that's the way they do it. Sometimes there's like specific NDAs, or there's a bunch of things that could cause that, but more likely it's the other way, where you still talk to people, and a lot of it's, you make these personal relationships with people, and they're your friends, they're like, oh, I worked with this guy for 4 or 5 years, he's my friend, and that's true. But like you said, you pick someone for the team, and it's right there in the middle, where it's like, well, that's an obvious problem. It's like trying to find a gas leak, and you look and there's a pipe drilled right into the side of another one. It's like, oh well, that's kind of obvious. But like, what separates these people from doing their jobs to major conflicts of interest to borderline like almost lobbyists.
Well, and it's not about getting information or stopping information. It is about stopping information out to the public because they don't care about what the people think. They don't care about that stuff. They just want power, and they will do whatever it takes, whether that's censoring people, all that stuff, from preventing people from hearing the actual truth. And
that's my biggest problem with it. Like, it's not so much because I could care less if there's an opposing viewpoint put up. Like, I've learned a lot from opposing viewpoints. It's like, oh wow, you looked at it this way. You've completely figured out a whole different way how to do that, and you skipped 3 or 4 steps. Okay, that's fantastic. Or like, wow, I totally disagree with this person. That's all right. It's okay if we disagree. I think that's lost. People are not okay to disagree, but it's to the point now where it's like, no. Just no, you're not allowed to disagree with me, so you're gone.
I think my answer was very biased towards having someone moderate in that kind of higher power for these social media platforms based on everything going on.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's up to the company who they hire.
You couldn't,
right?
And it's up to the campaign team to decide who they hire. I don't have any problem with them hiring that person in particular. I have a problem with that person leveraging their connections with these, again, massive social media companies that have the ability to control speech through a click directly,
Right.
That can influence tons of people, again, instantly. It becomes a problem.
Yeah, because these casual Twitter people who just scroll through just to get their news for the day, they might not even have any. They could be moderate primarily, and they just scroll through, and all they're seeing is bad press towards the right. So they're automatically going to think, "Wow, the right is the problem."
You ever sit back and see how many people actually use like solely Twitter as their information source? It's really sickening.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, primarily of the demographic around 18 to, I would say, probably 25 to 30.
That's right. Yeah.
They're getting their news primarily from social media platforms, and Twitter is that primary platform.
A lot of them just solely get it off Twitter, and that's it.
Right.
And they just see these poppy headlines that are like, somebody, it's big deal, and then you click on it, and then you actually read the substance, and it's just like, yeah, there was a big deal, but then we found out that none of it was actually true, and it's all written there in the document, but no one actually reads any of the stuff.
Just like the Trump tax thing.
Yeah.
That's a great example that they shared, where the headline's like, oh, he only paid $750, and everybody just reads the headline. It's like, oh my god, that's the narrative, and they look at the description, and here it turns out, I forget, it was either I think it was $5 million he paid. I could be wrong on that number.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it says right in the thing, it's like, oh, that's how much he paid. The $750 is what he was liable for. Now the narrative is, yeah, he only paid $750 worth of tax because they just read the clickbait title, and that's it, not the actual substance of the article. And then
misleading.
It's super misleading. Which I mean,
fake news.
I hate to say, have the story so swayed to the right, but the right's always the side that's getting the metaphorical crap beat out of them.
At least in recent memory.
Oh yeah. Well, that's more so what this is applicable to.
Quite honest, like if the same thing was going on the right, and the right was censoring people on the left, like this explicitly, then people on the right I would hope would absolutely say, hey, this is messed up.
Of course.
Even we're all Americans. We're all on the same team. We shouldn't be going at each other like we currently are.
It's embarrassing that we are going at each other like we are, though.
Every time I talk to people, because I talk to a lot of people that are around the world, and it's like, oh well, where are you from? It's like, I'm American, yada yada. It's like, and it's like I actually immediately get, it's like, how are they gonna judge me for being American? Like I get that a lot, because especially considering that the turmoil that our country's in, I'm not even gonna sugarcoat. It's what it is.
Especially, I mean, people on the outside don't really see what it's like on the inside, and quite honestly, whenever it comes to people on the outside, it's like we kind of became independent to not care about people on the outside's opinion. So although their opinion is, I guess, things can be gained from their opinion, they don't live here, and the laws and the stuff that happens here doesn't affect them directly.
Well, of course. When these type of laws affect American citizens, of course you're going to care about what an American citizen's opinion is on it over somebody else. It's just that you care about the opinion of the people that are directly involved in it. That's just obvious, you know. But if someone else said that, they might actually literally go be like, "Oh yeah, you're racist for saying it, or you're a xenophobe because you don't care what someone else's opinion is. That's not from America." It's like that's not it at all. That's just not even it.
It doesn't like we fought a revolution to not care what Britain has to say. No offense to British viewers if we have any, but we kind of threw some tea in the harbor. Got a little angry.
And that's the thing. It's like, you know, we definitely appreciate external advice, like you said earlier, with these different things. But this problem that we're running into now, at least in our particular situation, I think is an American problem.
Yeah, it very much is, because I mean we're the ones being censored, and there are places around the world that are also being censored, like China.
But that's in the law. There's explicitly.
Yeah,
I don't agree with it. But,
no, absolutely.
But there's explicit law written there that this is how it is. Whereas we don't have any law written, and it still happens. That's the dividing line.
That is the
there.
problem of it.
Like again, though, like I said, I still totally disagree with censorship anywhere. But we can only reflect on the laws that we're bound to.
And we definitely shouldn't be giving. For a side note, we shouldn't be giving money to countries that censor their people and throw them in concentration camps and all that.
Definitely not.
So, Crossfire, how do you think we should go about fixing this problem then?
See, it's tricky because you have to not. It's really hard to regulate it because once you start regulating it, you open up the doors to start regulating everything else. That's
Right.
That's opens up like, well, if I want to regulate company X to not censor other opinions, it's like, well, now you are modifying what their speech is, because you know when someone modifies what's put out there, they become a publisher, and if you change what they're publishing, then you're modifying their speech. So it's a really delicate thing. I just think that, you know, unless I think people should just be able to talk about whatever they really want, you know, as long as it's not actually like illegal
or
stuff
causing harm to other people.
Yeah, with a call to action. Like there's stuff that's clearly illegal. Like you can't yell fire in a movie theater. That's a call to action. You can get people hurt over that. That's illegal already, because it's not so much the speech, it's the literal call to action that is causing people duress. Like, that stuff, of course, I'm against. In a malicious way, you know. But if it's just someone sharing their opinion, then I think regulating that is a bad thing, because that leads to so much else. So I think, if back to your question, if company X is regulating this and censoring someone else's opinion, I think they should be held liable for censorship. Like, I think that they should fall underneath the same type of, especially if it's a public platform. I think if it's a giant private company, I think they can do whatever they want. But
Absolutely.
If it's a company
that houses a public platform that anybody can join without doing anything, that has multi-billion members, then I think they have to abide by a different standard, because it is a total different standard of business. And I think that that they shouldn't be able to do that. I think there should be some serious repercussions against that. Like, whatever this, I wouldn't know what you could possibly do to do that, because what do you just pin on one person? There's another person that shows up to fill their place, and it's the same thing. It doesn't stop it. So
Right.
So there has to be some rules and regulations that, again, because
it's a hard answer.
And we should be very careful with regulations as well, because we don't want to over-regulate.
Right.
But there definitely, I don't really think that there currently is enough regulation in the sense of these media platforms can censor people, and I just disagree with that. I don't think that they should be able to censor people, as long as they're not saying or doing anything malicious.
Yeah, like if someone comes out and says, "Oh, it's like a terroristic threat," of course, get rid of that, because that's breaking other laws. And I think too that if someone specifically says something that is incorrect, that is like verifiably incorrect, that they should have to be labeled as like opinion, or, I mean, we also have to be very careful with that as well, because that's tricky, I know.
because
Who's the one who says that it's correct?
who says? How do we know fact checkers are actually factual or non-biased or any of that?
That's the tricky part of it. Yeah, I understand.
And how do we know? Can people even be non-biased? Like, can people? I try my best to put my opinions aside, especially whenever working with other people or doing any of that stuff. But then we get into like speech that you disagree with is now hate speech and does physical harm to people, which basically is what they use to justify censorship. It's just like, oh, your opinion hurts my feelings, and my feelings create a mental issue that
duress,
mental distress, and I was hurt by whatever you said, so that justifies censorship.
If I had if I had a dime for every time something was told to me that I didn't like, that quote unquote hurt my feelings, I'd just be able to retire. That's just the way it is. If you go through life, with this false idea that everything's going to be hunky dory and everybody's going to agree with you and like what you have to say, then that's just
that would be a very boring life.
That's what this culture's becoming, though.
Yeah, that's the thing, because everybody's so... That goes back to our earlier thing where everybody's so afraid to say no to somebody or to disagree with somebody. So you build this thing up, and like I said, it just turns into this runaway thing that it's a false reality.
I think we should leverage the question on Slapshot. I think that would be a good spot to end. So, what do you think should be done?
So, like, I'm not going to beat the dead horse. It's like, it's hard to really... It's really hard to find the correct answer for it, because there's so many ways to go about it, and also bias has an effect on everybody. And with companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even, it's like you have these higher ups who are going to use their bias to some kind of degree, and more so we can relate to that article about Joe Biden that was prohibited of being linked in Facebook and Twitter. It's when people go to work every day, they can't let their bias affect the other lives of their peers and or their people that they influence on beneath them, because then that can create an entire negative company culture,
toxic environment. Yeah,
exactly, where you need to have these different ideas coming into one place to create
something better.
Right. If you have one company thinking the same way entirely throughout, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail really hard, because you don't have outside opinions coming in to better the organization. And I think if this keeps going, Twitter and Facebook I'm not going to say they're going to have a downfall, but they're going to have a lot of people against them if it keeps going the way it is.
Even as we speak already, but without any law or any action or anything being taken against them, they're already starting to have a downfall. People are moving away from the platforms. People are starting their own platforms. People that weren't affected like we were, and they're like, they see this happening. They're like, oh my god,
I see a problem.
They're like, these people are terrible, and they won't stand up for it. They won't sit there and fight, but they'll remove themselves from it. So like the numbers, I would imagine, are going down. Just by people.
Yeah, and I mean, it's pretty clear by the creation of like media apps like Locals or Parler that now have a following because people were either censored, banned, or they just decided they were sick of it, so they went somewhere else to give their ad revenue to.
To really answer the question, though, I feel like there is a way to maybe at least track those people in power with Facebook or Twitter, for example, since they've been the prime example of the topic. There has to be a way to like track like who within the company is banning these accounts.
Well, I mean, it's not necessary. That's like
a lot harder to actually do.
You can't just say like, oh, like moderator number 10, he banned this person. It was wrong. Whatever. The company should be held liable for that stuff because
right.
it's up to the company to moderate its own people.
So, right. It's how management trickles down. because
yeah.
the higher ups' opinions are trickling down into the moderators, and you're right, it's definitely not.
And
the
if you do
moderator's
something
fault.
wrong, if you put the part on wrong, then you get reprimanded or fired, depending on how many times you've messed it up.
So what happens when you push their own standard back against them? So when it's like, oh well, you didn't like, or you shut me down because you didn't like what I had to say. Well, then you just throw it right back on. It's like, well, that's hate speech. And then everybody starts like getting in a tizzy and start raising their hands and stuff because it's like, oh no, the glass house has been shattered, you know. But
yeah.
So what would you think to making the people that have clear bias having to follow like the same rules that lobbyists do? Because like if they're clearly biased for left or right, then they are whatever they're doing. And again, so the censoring. So if they're censoring left for the benefit of the right, or if they're censoring right for the benefit of the left, they are directly contributing to that side.
Right.
So it makes them different than doing stuff through, like, again, I know lobbyists deal directly with the government, but
Right.
this isn't too far away from that.
No, it doesn't seem at all. It's
In the grand scheme of things. So,
And I'm not a congressman or anything, but like, and I probably don't have the best solution for it, but I definitely think that Congress should, and I would hope that Congress should put some kind of leash on the rampant censorship.
Yeah, I mean that's the hope, but
you know how everything else goes.
Yeah. But I think that is a good place to wrap everything up.
time will tell very soon, I think, on how this gets solved, or if it will get solved.
I certainly hope so for everybody's sake, not just ours, but just
anybody in general, because I think it does a great disservice to just generation.
The idea of
Americans in
America.
general.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
So with that, I'd like to thank everyone that has listened to our inaugural podcast. I think we would all really enjoy some feedback on how we did, things that you think we could do better, things that you want to hear about, things you want to hear more of, and stuff like that. We also, with that, we're going to be opening up a Discord, and the Discord link will be in the description of this video or podcast.
Yeah, so we'll have different channels on there, and anybody can join it. There'll be sections for new ideas. There'll be a discussion section that you could openly discuss a certain topic that we're dealing with. We definitely are not, like, again, how we preface this, we're not experts, so we'd like to hear what other people have to say about this.
Absolutely, and I think we'll be getting a podcast questions section at some point. So
We can add that in, yep.
Yeah, get listeners involved. You guys can ask whatever questions you'd like. We can be absolutely more than willing to discuss
And
openly with them.
Yeah, we definitely some of the things that we've discussed is we're probably going to have other people in on here. In the introduction, you heard Shaggy. There may be other people that are in our group or outside our group, because we would love to have people that are listening join in on the discussion as well. So, like I said, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen, and hope to see you next time.